Welcome back to the Real Life Theology Podcast. Today we feature Mike Williams talking about the new restoration movement of love, mercy, and compassion. This episode will help us understand the crucial role of love, mercy, and compassion in the modern church and how we can engage the younger generation. No further ado, here's the episode.
I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. It's grabbing all of our face masks. That as we think of a collapsing culture, that's one thing. But to watch our own kids walk out the door, that's entirely something different. And that shook us all up. As we talked about yesterday, it's put even more gas on this fire about what happens in 60 Minutes on Sunday. Like that's working. It's started this firestorm within us that I must say it's a very insular conversation as we look inwardly and say, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with them? It is interesting, some of the rocks we throw too, attacking their biblical literacy as their parents and grandparents and Bible class teachers and pastors were throwing rocks at kids for their lack of biblical literacy. There's something wrong with that. But it's an insular conversation. But one of the things that's absent from the conversation is the church's impact on the world. And as we think about these researchers who are interviewing the kids when they walk out the door and they say things like, the church is irrelevant, we interpret that as a Sunday morning irrelevance. I think they're saying something much deeper than that. I've had this recurring conversation over the last 10 or 15 years with college students, just trying to dig into their mind and say, what is it that you really want to do with your life? And there is a recurring theme that kind of comes out. I want to start a nonprofit. Interesting. Tell me about that. Compelled by broken humanity all around them, they want to do something about it. So they want to start a nonprofit. Why would a Christian start a nonprofit? Now, I have nothing against nonprofits. I moved here from Montgomery, Alabama, where in addition to being president of Faulkner University, I led the campaign for the United Way in Montgomery. We raised $4 million of my last year for good, holy work. I'm not anti-nonprofit. But why does a Christian want to start a nonprofit? It's because this generation no longer believes that the church of God is a part of the redemptive work in the world. They're tired of waiting on us. We tell them that they're not really productive until they're 45. There's really not a place for a 27-year-old at our church. Just wait. You're one of the emerging leaders. And they walk out the door and start a nonprofit. I think that ought to speak to us today. As we look at the teachings of Jesus Christ and the apostolic teaching, and really some of the first works of that first church, the majority of the New Testament is not just about him discipling the 12, but it's about his interaction with that broader community. Has the church just become a building, an event, and no longer a movement? The church was supposed to be the proof of the gospel. Here's a verse that we've memorized many times. A new command I give to you, love one another. As I've loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And our default interpretation is that if all of us love each other, we're going to scream to the world that we're from God. But the lifestyle of Jesus would suggest it's more than that. It doesn't capture anybody's attention if I love my wife, if I love my sons, if I love my church family, if I love y'all. That doesn't capture anybody's attention. And Jesus didn't create a stir when he communicated that he loved the disciples. The love that captured the attention was the love extended to the Samaritan woman. It was the invitation to a tax collector, and it was the touch. It was the very touch of a leper. The love that Jesus was referring to was not accountability groups or church softball leagues. It was reckless. It was unconstrained. A tidal wave of love, mercy, and compassion. I think it's kind of intriguing to look at this early infant church that lived in a very caustic culture, a culture that we would say is very similar to what we are experiencing today. But I would suggest to you that first century Israel was far more crazy than 2023 America. Historians tell us a little bit about Roman culture. Dr. James Kennedy wrote this. He says, life was expendable prior to Christianity's influence. In those days, abortion was rampant. Abandonment was commonplace. It was common for infirm babies. Babies like my son Quinn with autism, they're out. And certainly females, unwanted ones, they were taken out to the trash heap. It was actually legal. It's called exposure. A legal activity that, if you have an unwanted one or a girl or Janie, first century Israel, expendable, take her out to the trash heap. It's called exposure, and let the animals come to get her. There's gladiator contests, sexual promiscuity, homosexuality, and the marginalization of women. This was a barbaric culture. And yet this small little band of Christians, they had a completely different worldview. They cared about the sick, they cared about the elderly, they cared about the disabled and the marginalized. It was Christians prompted by their faith that were the first ones that started hospitals and orphanages. It was the influence of the early church that actually elevated the value of women. They were propelled by this benevolence. They had this good Samaritan ethic and ethos. Their influence even impacted the courts and standards of justice. In essence, the church transformed the Roman Empire. And regardless of what we think about Constantine, he ended the practice of exposure. To think about the early church, I think we ought to think about the growth. It started with, what do we know from the Bible about this little movement? We know that there was 12 disciples. We know that there were 70 that were sent out in Luke chapter 10. And on the day of Pentecost, there was 3,000 that gave their lives to Jesus Christ. That's really all we know about the numbers. This little infant church. But some historians believe that there were only about 100 churches in AD 100. Dr. Rodney Stark, a scholar from Baylor, his research would suggest that there were about 40,000 Christians in AD 150, about a little over 200,000 Christians in AD 200, and by AD 250, there were 1.2 million believers in Jesus Christ. This barbaric, pagan culture is completely transformed by the influence of Christians. And from then on, we see Christians making a powerful impact in the world. What does Jesus' actual teachings and lifestyle suggest to this conversation? Was life, at least in my mind as a little kid in Ohio, thought Jesus was just a miracle worker. And then as I got older, I realized that most of the miracles were not many, performed in complete obscurity, and never produced faith. In fact, other than the resurrection, all the miracles of Jesus had no lasting significance. Because those people that were fed, 4 hours later, they got hungry again. Those people who were healed from their sickness, I got sick again. And even Lazarus, raised from the dead, he got to die again. The one thing that we all worry about is our own passing, and Lazarus got to do it twice. There is no lasting significance to any of the miracles. They are not just Jesus Christ flexing his divine muscle and saying, listen to me, I am from God. There's more going on here. Deeply in the heart of the miracles are really a compassionate heart. It's a love for humanity that comes bursting out. In John chapter 14, it has this intriguing little verse that says, yes, the miracles do give evidence that I am from the Father, but greater works will you do in my name. Now, what is that? Greater works than the miracles? Yes, the works of love, mercy, and compassion. Those are the greater works of the kingdom. I believe it's time for a new restoration movement. A restoration movement that is absolutely committed to biblical teaching. A restoration movement that is calling on the Holy Spirit to guide us and to propel us to advance the teachings of Jesus Christ to a lost world. But it's got to be coupled with the restoration of first century love, first century mercy, first century compassion. I'm not advocating for just a social gospel that's just about service. But we can't demonstrate to the world that we're from Him without love. This discipling making movement can't just be an intellectual conversation. We earn the right to tell them about the Lord Jesus Christ when we reflect His love. And this generation actually wants to go there. They're actually pulling us out the door. As they walk out the door, maybe we should go with them and go into the streets and redeem the world through love, mercy, and compassion. Erwin McManus, in his book, Unstoppable Force, said, the church sometimes can be categorized in 3 different categories, especially when the culture around them is collapsing. He said, one response is when the world is going to hell in a handbasket, is that we get antagonistic. We get legalistic, we get protectionism, we get isolation, we just get hacked and disgusted. My dad got a little bit of that taste when he was older in life. After my mom died, we moved him to Cersei, and I would sometimes stop in and see him at lunchtime, and by noon, he'd had 6 hours of national and international news, and his pants were on fire. I was like, Dad, so, tap it down. He was mad. He was mad at the world. The world as he knew it was changing, and he was angry. And McManus reminds us that that's sometimes one of those natural responses. When we see what's happening in the world, we get angry. We long for a day that is no longer here.
3 minutes.
Okay. McManus also says that there's also an apathetic response. It's hopeless. We just avoid the issue. Let them go. But there's an apostolic response where we engage the world for Jesus Christ. And I believe that's the moment. That's the moment that we're trying to lean into, is to run towards the brokenness of the world and to have a first responder mentality that when the world is collapsing and everybody's natural response is to run away, it is the people of God that run towards it, run towards the crisis. And I believe this generation is actually wants to go there. And so can't we capture their imagination by being the church that really does resemble the love and mercy and compassion of Jesus Christ? And can we not earn the very right to tell them about not just their felt needs, but their real needs for a Savior? That's what I believe needs to be a part of our first century restoration movement.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Life Theology Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, like, and subscribe to our channel. We hope to see you guys in the next episode.